Hey everybody, and welcome to the launch of Starlink-7 with me, Raw Space. So the weather's looking a little dicey today. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to pull this off, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. Hazards of launching from Florida. The weather is never going to be predictable, especially during the times of year when it rains, which is the entire year. So currently, let's see, 60% favorable, so there's a 40% chance of scrub. Again, we'll have to wait and see. The launch, so this will be the 8th batch of 60 Starlink satellites to be launched by SpaceX. They call it Starlink-7 because the first batch was not Starlink-1, it was like Starlink Demo, or I forget what the name of it was, but the numbers started with the second launch. So they'll always be one off. The water was getting lonely there. So, launching from Cape Canaveral, not Kennedy Space Center. Sometimes they launch from Pad 39A. Other times they launch from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. It's just a few miles away, just down the road. It's all part of the same complex, but under different. It's the military base versus the NASA spaceport. Targeting 9:25 p.m. Eastern for launch, which is in like 50. Well, it says right here it's in 51 minutes. There you go. I should look at my own countdown timer. So usually with the Starlink launches, there's an instantaneous launch window. That is to say, they don't have, like, if they miss 9:25 p.m. Eastern, which is 10, 12, 1, 1:25 GMT. If they miss 9:25 Eastern, then that means they would have to wait until usually the next day, a little bit earlier, because the time creeps forward a little bit due to the rotation of the Earth and the speeds of orbit. That's just how it works out. But yeah, if they go live, we'll go live. You know what? Let me switch to the. There we go. Yeah, switch to the Falcon 9 launch background. All right, let me take a look at the chat. Oh my gosh, Mark, you're awake. Mark Dezer, one of my mods. He lives in the Netherlands, which is, I believe, 5 hours? No, 6 hours ahead of us right now, during daylight savings, I think. So it's in the wee hours of the morning there, even earlier than he usually wakes up. Face reveal. Yeah, Mohammed. I started putting myself on camera a few months ago. Microbyte down in Florida reports some holes in the clouds. That's always good. I mean, we prefer there to be clear skies, but again, Florida's a crazy place for weather. Appable with some SpaceX news. SpaceX has approval from NASA to begin to use reused boosters and capsules on commercial crew missions. That's important because so typically the way SpaceX has done it is they reuse their boosters, and then finally at their boosters end of life, at the fourth or fifth iteration, they will launch a Starlink mission because that's internal, and if they lose the payload, it's no skin off their customer's nose. It's an internal loss. And of course, the booster that was the Falcon 9 booster that was used to launch Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley last week successfully. They It was a brand new booster. There were no char marks. It had never flown before. And so it makes sense to use a booster that hasn't had a bunch of stresses already put on it. But it could also be argued that it's important to use boosters that have been flight proven as well. I'm not sure what kind of calculus there is in weighing the two, the new the new undamaged booster versus the booster that may be damaged but has proven that it works. But ultimately, in the name of reusability, it's very important to be able to reuse boosters for everything. And I guess SpaceX has proven over their many, would you believe it has only been 5 years since SpaceX started launching Falcon 9s into orbit? It seems like much longer, but it's only been 5 years. And in that time, this is water, by the way. I don't drink alcohol. I don't like the taste, and I don't like what it does to people. Although these days I could maybe, well, that'd be a bad road to go down. Yeah. So, looking back up a few minutes. Hi Raw, TLI72, a regular of the channel, is asking, is there anything important about the launch tonight, or is it just a routine Starlink launch? Well, the importance is that it will be placing 60 more Starlink satellites into orbit. There's nothing particularly special about this one that I'm aware of. I don't know. I don't have the latest news on SpaceX's implementation of dark paint or coatings or whatever to try to make the Starlink satellites less glaringly obvious as they reflect the sunlight. I'm not sure what the status of that is, but there's nothing inherently special about this particular launch, although it was delayed until after the Crew Dragon launch because SpaceX was, busy doing something much more important on the grand stage, and they wanted to defer this until after. Akibaho Wrinkle wonders why they don't launch from the deserts in California. No rain or clouds. That is a great question, actually. There are very specific reasons why. So the reason why only a select few launches happen from California, say Vandenberg, where it's actually on the coast and tends to be foggy, they don't launch any orbital flights from like in the interior of California where it's super dry. The reason is because of Earth's rotation. So because of the fact that Earth is a sphere, almost perfect sphere, and the fact that it rotates to the west, clockwise, you want to launch any equatorial launches. You want to launch from the eastern coast of your country. And you want to launch it as close to the equator as possible. So for most countries, that would be in the northern hemisphere. So they want to launch as far south as possible. That way they pick up the maximum, they borrow, or rather they inherit the maximum angular momentum from the Earth's rotation. The closer you are to the equator, the more speed you borrow from the Earth's own rotation when you launch, which means that you can launch heavier payloads with less fuel if you're closer to the equator. And consequently, you want to launch to the east for equatorial, launches. Launching in a retrograde direction is very rare. I don't even remember the last retrograde launch, but and you want to launch from the coast, not from like some inland location like China, because when your boosters come down, they will come down in the water. Whether it's a SpaceX booster or most rockets, they expend their boosters, and so they just splash down in an uncontrolled manner. Well, you want that to happen out in the middle of the ocean where it's only going to kill a couple of fish, not raining down on your cities and villages. China. So, or Russia for that matter. They launch from Kazakhstan, from Plesetsk, from Vostochny, all inland locations, and they're Vostochny, the boosters might be able to make it to the ocean, but especially in the case of Kazakhstan and Plesetsk, far to the north, the boosters just rain down on the land. And so even Texas is off because you have the Gulf of Mexico, but the boosters can still fly over Florida, and you definitely don't want boosters coming down in Florida. Clearly because of the Endangered Species Act, not the humans. Who cares about them? So medium rare space. Nope, it only comes raw. Worm raw. So, okay. So for those of you who've been around for a little while, you may notice that my logo, my avatar looks a little different. Well, very different. It used to be, and this is not necessarily a permanent change, but I was playing around. So during the Crew Dragon mission, there was a lot of banter back and forth between the NASA commentators and the astronaut guest commentators, and I think the SpaceX people may have mentioned it, but it was mostly a NASA discourse about the NASA logo. So NASA sort of temporarily resurrected the worm logo for their one moment. I have to time out somebody. Don't be rude. They temporarily resurrected the worm logo from the 1970s and 80s. And the discussion was the meatball versus the worm. The meatball, of course, is the traditional blue circle with the stars on it, and the NASA in the serif, the old-timey serif font with the swoosh in red. So yeah, there was discussion of the worm logo versus the meatball logo, and somebody mentioned a wormball logo, which was an unofficial hybrid of the two, with the meatball background and swoosh and the NASA worm lettering. So I made one of those, and briefly I made it my channel icon, but for licensing reasons, to avoid any potential legalities about reusing the NASA logo, I stylized my own version to the raw ball, or the raw worm ball, which is a similar blue background, not the same as NASA's, but inspired by NASA's, with a similar red sort of arrow swoosh, and the raw letters in a worm-like font. So it's an homage, not a copy. But there you go. That's the raw worm ball / whatever that you see as my channel icon. This is again a few minutes ago. I wish I could. Well, if I spoke too quickly, you wouldn't be able to understand me. Maybe I should condense what I have to say so that it doesn't take as long. But a few minutes ago, Chris V was responding to the discussion about new versus old boosters, and he said that if he was an astronaut, he would want to fly on top of a proven booster. Of course, there's also the question of how much refurbishment happens in between flights, and not being a SpaceX employee myself, or having the time to really dig into the internal discussion forums or whatever where people actually know these things. I don't know how extensive the refurbishing is between flights. Not nearly as extensive as, for example, for the space shuttle, but it's not just like driving your car where you get in, you drive it, and then you get in again. Booster es el cohete del lanzamiento. Checking up on the chat. Launch window tonight, Chris, I believe is an instantaneous launch window at 9:25 p.m. Eastern, 1:25 GMT. Hablo solamente un poco de español. Yeah, I know I know quite a few words in Spanish, but my syntax is very simplistic. A toddler could do better, I'm sure. But haven't taken Spanish in many years. But I understand it as a foreign language better than other ones. Mad Matt hopes to see Starlink train in the sky with one of these launches. I did see it a few weeks ago, last month, whenever it was, the previous Starlink launch. I did catch it, and I believe I posted some photos of it. But the skies, like the weather here in North Carolina, has been complete junk for weeks. It's been just rain and clouds all over the place. I haven't even had the chance to take star photos on a regular night because of all the rain and clouds. I mean, rain is good. I do appreciate the importance of rain. We've been through droughts before, and I don't want any of that. But iVape from Australia, launching from Slick 40 at Cape Canaveral, 60% go. So I guess let me check the Twitterverse here. Okay, nothing new from SpaceX. So their last post about it was 9 hours ago, so there's no new news from them, and no news is good news. TJ Kaz has an off-topic question. Hopefully it's an appropriate one. But go ahead and ask. And if it's not appropriate, I'm sure my mods will take care of it. Racer X, yes, of course. The launch will be streamed live right here if it launches tonight, if the weather doesn't force them to scrub. I just come on a half hour, 45 minutes before the launch to do the Q&A, but the main attraction is yet to come. Microbyte, the boosters do not get a new paint job. They come back all scorched and ugly, and they go back up again, all scorched and ugly. No need wasting paint. Maria Kutujan is asking, returning to the subject of the site for rocket launches, is the ocean an important point of support? Well, the ocean gives launch providers many benefits. It provides a nice soft cushion for capsule landings. It provides a safe place to dump rockets when either if something goes wrong or if they're simply expendable, they can dump out at sea and not bother anybody. I mean, again, it boils down a lot to also the ease of transport. I mean, if you have a booster that comes down in the middle of a field somewhere, that can be very difficult to get to. But if it's in the ocean, no problem. I mean, if you just dispose of it and let it sink, then okay, fine. But if you go retrieve it, then navigating the ocean is, I mean, there's no walls or roads or trees to get in your way. And of course, as far as now, an interesting point about capsule landings. Crew Dragon was originally intended to propulsively land itself using its Super Draco thrusters on land, but they opted to go with a parachute descent and a water landing because of the extra hoops they would have had to jump through for the propulsive landing on land. So, yeah, so it could have been landable, but they opted to go with the parachutes instead. Peyton House asks, why won't let me try that again. Why won't SpaceX refurbish all of their boosters? Well, they reuse all the boosters they can, multiple times. I think the most times they've flown one booster currently stands at 5, I think. I think their ultimate goal is to reuse each booster up to 10 times, which would extract a great deal of value or extend the value of the platform significantly. So the only boosters they don't refurbish are the ones that are busted, the ones that crash or fall over or are too damaged by exposure to, like if they fall in the water or something and they're too damaged from the salt water. I think they still reuse parts of the boosters, even the ones that are damaged. But like, for example, the titanium grid fins, unless they're bent, are valuable and certainly worth reusing. Whereas it might be difficult to repair busted up carbon fiber, which is what the tube is made out of. Robert Quinn asks if this is going up the coast. Usually with these launches, the trajectory they take brings them up the eastern, offshore, up the eastern seaboard and out over like Ireland, Great Britain area, and the Netherlands. Like, I remember the first Starlink launch went right over the Netherlands, and there was some cool video of the Starlink train flying overhead from there. Chris V, thank you. Whenever you make a creative decision, whenever one makes a creative decision, it's normal to second guess yourself, but if I'm getting positive feedback, then it must be okay. Ezekiel Champarella asks what the 60 satellites are going to be used for. So, let me do a little quick math. Calc 60 times 7. I'm sorry, calc 60 times 8. So these are Starlink satellites. Starlink is a mega constellation that has been in the process of being deployed by SpaceX. They're SpaceX satellites launched by SpaceX rockets from, well, not from SpaceX soil, but so the previous launch, the 7th launch, marked the approximately 420th satellite, Starlink satellite to be launched, and this would be the 480th Starlink satellite, minus a few that got deorbited or stopped working or whatever. But basically, 480 Starlink satellites. So what it is it's a low latency, low Earth orbit, broadband internet constellation of satellites. So satellite internet is generally provided by geostationary satellites, which are 23,000 miles away, and they hover over the same location on Earth all the time, because that's what geostationary orbit is. It's at the distance and the speed that means that the satellite always stays in the same position in the sky. And so what Starlink and also OneWeb, which is another satellite internet constellation, which is being developed, though much smaller in scope than Starlink. What it's going to do is provide internet coverage to essentially the entire world. I'm not sure what the limits to how far north and south they're going to cover, but basically to the whole world. Hopefully to the far north and the far south as well, because it would be really amazing to have reliable broadband internet coverage in like the remote regions of the Arctic and Antarctic. Bringing the entire world together. So some of their customers will be the underserved populations, people who don't have ready access to internet. Other customers will be military and government, because I think there will be subsets of Starlink satellites that are expressly allocated for specific customers. And hopefully one of their customers in the future will be me. Me and you. All right, somebody's blowing up my phone. What is going on here? Oh. Okay. People telling me what's going on. Okay. Broadbanding. TLI72 asks when I started my channel. So I created it back in January of 2017 as a place for me to put old Apollo videos, because I thought they were cool and I wanted to share them. And obviously I didn't make them, but I kind of ignored the channel for a few months. I didn't think much of it until I happened to log in one day and I saw that one of my videos had a couple 100,000 views and I had a few hundred subscribers, and I hadn't even been active on the channel. And it was the television broadcast of the Apollo 11 launch. So I was like, wow, there must be an interest in this. And so I sought about looking for ways to give people more of what they were interested in and what also interested me. And after the Starman launch, after the launch of Falcon Heavy in February of 2018, I started streaming that just because I thought it was amazing, and I really enjoy ambient music because my soul needs to relax whenever possible. And it just grew from there. I mean, the community grew around the 24/7 live chat, and I really enjoyed what it had become. So here we are. And somewhere around, I guess, May 2018, I started streaming live events. And one day I plan to actually be able to stream them myself with my own equipment from on site, kind of like Everyday Astronaut and some other people do, NASA Space Flight Organization. But yeah, so here we are. Peyton House, if SpaceX didn't deorbit any of their Starlink satellites, there would be 480 with this launch, because each launch houses 60 satellites. They barely fit inside the Falcon 9 payload fairing. Clemens West asks, will this launch up the East Coast? Probably. Usually these launches head out kind of to the northeast and up the East Coast and then over Great Britain and Europe. But different Starlink launches, because they're trying to. I don't know what their orbital track strategy is. I don't know if they all will launch on the same trajectory or not. I'm not an orbital mechanics expert, so in order to achieve their sort of grid pattern of Starlink satellites that they're aiming for, I'm not sure if they sometimes will launch, more to with a shallower orbital trajectory, like for more to the east than to the north. I don't know, but the chat's hopping. Santa cannot hide. But these aren't imaging satellites. These aren't spy satellites. This is broadband internet. So, Thomas Anti, there are no Starlink launches from the West Coast that I'm aware of. It's possible they could do one. I mean, if they were going to do more of a polar launch or a higher inclination orbit, they could launch from Vandenberg, but I don't. There's no indication thus far that they will do that. Updating SpaceX. Okay, so as of 5 minutes ago, SpaceX tweeted that we are at T-minus 30 minutes and that they will go live 10 minutes before liftoff, which is interesting. Almost all times previously, SpaceX, unless it's a special event like Crew Dragon, they go live 15 minutes before liftoff. So maybe they're slimming down their webcast to, I don't know, maybe they're tired from Crew Dragon, or giving their commentators a break. Who knows? So, see, 25, 15. So in 13 minutes, they should be going live. And I'll drop off as soon as they do, because you're not here for me, you're here for them.
Not being there is an essential component of being. You don't have the one without the other, just as your buzzsaw has no teeth without having that.
Okay, Gerard. Okay, that's good info. Gerard says apparently the highest inclination orbit for Starlink will be 81 degrees, which is pretty high. It's pretty far north, which should be enough for the poles. One of the problems with being at the poles is that satellite internet is like geostationary satellites. They do not get good coverage at the poles because they're at a very shallow angle to the horizon. Well, they're actually below the horizon if you're at the pole. And obviously we don't have an installation on the North Pole, but at the South Pole, I'm not actually sure how they. I think they use lower Earth orbit satellite. I mean, internet satellites that don't provide regular coverage. I'm not actually sure, because you can't even see geostationary orbit from the pole. So, and that's why, I don't know if you remember last year there was that around the world airplane flight. They took it was a one last orbit. They took a couple of astronauts, or one astronaut and like a cosmonaut. He hopped a ride for a leg of the journey. They took off from the shuttle landing strip in California, the shuttle landing strip at Kennedy Space Center, and then they headed north over the North Pole, down through Kazakhstan, down to like some island in the Indian Ocean, and then down around the South Pole, and then back up past Chile and all the way back up to Kennedy. It took, I don't even remember, a couple days. And anyway, when they did that, whenever they were near the poles, their live stream signal dropped out, because for as long as they were past a certain latitude, because of the loss of reception from the geostationary satellites. Merle Metzger asks, how many more Starlinks yet to be launched to complete the series? That's a good question. So the initial plan was for 12,000 Starlink satellites, which is a ton. But then they put forward a proposal for an additional 32,000 satellites, which or 30,000 satellites, which would put the total at 42,000. And I don't know where that went. I don't know if that was approved or shot down. It was highly discussed, because that's way, way, way more satellites than humans have ever launched. I mean, we've only launched like roughly 6,000 satellites in the history of the space of satellites. So either way, this is going to be a mega constellation. And it's probably going to take them longer to deploy than they had initially planned. I mean, their intention was to have a launch every like 2 weeks, which isn't happening. But there have been other other factors that have interfered, like COVID and other launch priorities, but yeah, the initial plan was for 12,000. I put a link in the chat for the track list, all the tracks that are played, all the tracks, the ambient tracks, the chill tracks that are played here on Raw Space, both in the live streams and in the Starman 24/7 stream, which is not live, but it's very cool, are listed there. They're all copyright free. You can use them to your heart's content and not get copyright claims, unless, of course, one of the songs goes from being copyright free goes from being copyright free to being copyrighted, which occasionally happens. What happens much more often is that some bonehead music producer will take a copyright free song, add some junk to it, like rap voiceover or some extra notes or something, and then they'll re-copyright that. And so then that retroactively causes YouTube's Content ID system to flag instances of the original copyright-free song. So even even the original artist will get a copyright claim on their own song on their channel because of these idiots who try to take advantage of the system or are simply ignorant of the way the system works. And so, yeah, content creators have to deal with that junk all the time. The Crew Dragon launch, oh my gosh, was an absolute mess of copyright claims. There were NBC Universal and National Geographic both laid claim to the NASA and SpaceX coverage, which caused even NASA to get a copyright. Like NASA's own video was blocked from NASA's channel because of National Geographic's illegal and false copyright claim. It drives us nuts. Me and NASA, we go way back. Anyway. All right. Chris Scott. Hello, how's it going? Hope you're great. Where's SpaceX Starlink-7 heading to? They are headed for low Earth orbit. That is roughly under 600 miles. So between 200 and 600 miles in altitude. Above that, you get into the inner Van Allen radiation belts, and that would interfere with the electronics. Modern electronics are more sensitive. They're less robust than legacy electronics because the parts are much, much smaller. The miniaturization is much greater, and therefore when a stray charged particle flies through a piece of modern electronics, there's a much greater chance that it might interfere with a bit somewhere or a byte somewhere else. Oh, 404 on the track list? All right, I'll get that fixed at some point. Not right now. Gazer Moon, is there stock of SpaceX? No, actually, SpaceX is a private company. They want to keep it that way. I believe... So, if I remember correctly, if you want to invest in SpaceX, the only way you can kind of do that is to invest in Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. Because a few years back, and I don't know if they've divested or since then or what, but a few years back, Google actually bought a not insignificant portion of SpaceX. And so if you want to invest in SpaceX, invest in Google. Go figure. So SpaceX is starting their stream. So I will be, looks like they've got about 4 minutes until they go live. But we see the Starfield background and Vilius Zavadskis. Let me know if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I always want to pronounce names correctly because that's who you are. So. Satellite internet works by beaming information through the vacuum of space, where it travels 47% faster than in fiber optic cable. Good info. What will be the cost of the internet? That's a good question. I don't think Starlink is available for purchase yet. I think they're still they're still in the testing phases, despite the fact that it's the biggest satellite constellation in existence. But their intention is for it to be affordable for regular people, not just governments and businesses. So, shoot, if I had to pay $200 a month, which would be a lot for internet service, but if I had to pay $200 a month for Starlink, I would do it, because low latency broadband internet that I can use anywhere in the world, under 81 degrees north and south, that is a valuable service. Merle Metzger asks what the vertical spacing distance from the ISS is. ISS orbits, there aren't any satellites, or not many satellites, that orbit in the same altitude range as the ISS, and that's by design for the safety of the station. As far as they have the Starlink deployment plan involves putting groups of satellites at different altitudes, and you can find that information online. I don't have it handy, but there are different tiers or levels of orbits that they're going to aim for. So Anthony King said that Elon Musk says that SpaceX will need at least 400 Starlink satellites for basic service, with 800 needed for moderate coverage. So this launch will put them at a little under 480. So I'm actually going to have to drop off now. There's still a couple of pending questions, but I'm sorry. I didn't realize that music was playing in the background. I need to pay closer attention. So I'm actually going to drop off now so that I can put that music back on for you. And SpaceX should be going live here any moment. So thank you for coming, and enjoy the launch, hopefully.
It is Wednesday, June 3rd, and you are looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 9:25 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Cape Canaveral Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida. Hello from SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. My name is Jesse Anderson, and I'm a lead manufacturing engineer here at SpaceX. You're watching a live webcast for our 8th Starlink mission and our 9th mission this year. To date, we've launched over 420 Starlink satellites to orbit. As a reminder, Starlink is a constellation of satellites that can provide high-speed, low-latency internet all over the globe, particularly in remote or rural areas where connectivity is limited or completely unavailable. This latest launch comes on the heels of our historical first launch of humans over the weekend. In case you missed it, we'll give you a quick update on that later in the broadcast. At T-minus 9 minutes, all systems are go for an on-time liftoff this evening. And if for any reason there is a hold on the countdown today, we have a backup launch window opportunity tomorrow at 9:04 p.m. Eastern. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9, our 70-meter two-stage liquid-fueled launch vehicle, getting ready for launch from Space Launch Complex 40, or SLIC 40. This booster will be flying for the 5th time today. It previously supported the Telstar 18 Vantage mission, Iridium 8, and the first Starlink mission, as well as the third Starlink mission. The bottom two-thirds of the vehicle is the first stage. You can see the soot markings left over from its last flight. And the first stage accelerates the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space with the help of 9 Merlin engines at the base of the rocket. Today we will be attempting to recover the first stage for the 5th time, which, if we are successful, would be the first 5th landing of a Falcon 9 booster. Today we are using our drone ship Just Read the Instructions, which was our very first drone ship, and opposed to our more commonly used drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, since it was currently occupied by our Demo 2 Falcon 9 booster up until last night from this past weekend's exciting historical launch. Just Read the Instructions is currently stationed about 350 nautical miles northeast of the Cape and about 200 nautical miles east of Charleston. Above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine, which ignites after the first stage separates. The second stage is what will carry the Starlink satellites into an elliptical orbit above the Earth's surface. From there, they will use their propulsion system to move up to their operational altitude of 550 kilometers. And Falcon 9 has been loading propellant since T-minus 35 minutes. And as a reminder, we use a rocket-grade kerosene, or RP1, as our fuel, and super chilled liquid oxygen, or LOX, as our oxidizer to power Falcon 9. And currently, RP1 and LOX are nearly fully loaded on both stages, and LOX will continue to be topped off right until the last minute of the countdown. The stack of 60 satellites is safely enclosed inside of the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, which you can see on your screen. That's that pointed structure at the very top of the rocket. This protects the satellites from the aerothermal heating, aerodynamic loads, and contamination during ascent. But once we reach the vacuum of space, we no longer need them, so we will jettison the fairing as the second stage continues on its journey to orbit. We will be attempting to recover the fairing halves today using our recovery ships Mystery and Mischief. At approximately T plus 40 minutes, the team will perform a poll to confirm if we're all good to make a catch attempt, and weather plays a factor as well as telemetry of the fairing, its altitude, position, and speed. And we were watching some thick clouds earlier, making sure that we are good for weather, just like we did in last week's launch, Demo 2 launch, constantly checking on the weather. But today, we are currently go for weather at T0. So with that, the vehicle, satellites, weather, and range are all looking good for an on-time liftoff, just about 5.5 minutes from now. And as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, we are coming off an amazing weekend with the SpaceX and NASA teams successfully launching the dads, NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, to the International Space Station. Our second demonstration mission, or what we call Demo 2, lifted off from historic Launch Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center on Saturday, May 30th, and 19 hours later docked with the International Space Station. The mission marks the first time a commercially built spacecraft has launched people to the space station, and the first time in nearly 10 years that the U.S. has launched astronauts into space from U.S. soil. The video that you see on your screen is Bob and Doug floating around in orbit, giving us a tour of their Dragon spacecraft, which they named Endeavour to commemorate the huge efforts made by the SpaceX team, as well as a nod to the first shuttle that they both flew on. Demo 2 is an end-to-end flight test from launch to docking to splashdown. It is the final major milestone for SpaceX's human spaceflight system to be certified by NASA for operational crew missions to and from the International Space Station. While Bob and Doug certainly had the best seats for the Demo 2 launch, they weren't the only ones to try their hand at docking Dragon to the space station. We recently released the same simulation that the astronauts trained on in advance of the Demo 2 mission. Head over to iss-sim.spacex.com to give it a try yourself. That simulation, the displays in Crew Dragon, and a bunch of other really cool projects were developed by SpaceX software engineers. Software engineers at SpaceX get to work across exciting projects that drive our rockets, spacecraft, satellites, and ground systems. If you're interested in helping roll out Starlink to the world or taking humanity to the moon and Mars, send your resume to softwarejobs@spacex.com. We will also be setting up a Reddit Ask Me Anything, or AMA, with our software team in the next week or so stay tuned to our social media accounts for details on that. Once Demo 2 is complete, the SpaceX and NASA teams have reviewed all the data for certification. NASA astronauts Victor Glover, Mike Hopkins, Shannon Walker, and JAXA astronaut Soichi Noguchi have been assigned to fly on Dragon's first 6-month operational mission, which we're calling Crew 1, which is targeted for later this year. We are currently 2.5 minutes from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. The first and second stages are both nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Super chilled liquid oxygen, which as I mentioned earlier is our propellant oxidizer, is what's creating those white clouds that you see around Falcon 9 when it's exposed to the warmer ambient air. You can see that on your screen there. First stage should finish prop loading, actually already has finished prop loading at T-3 minutes, and second stage is coming up on finished prop loading at T-2 minutes. At T-60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup, and that means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown.
Stage 2 lock load is complete.
So with the Starlink payload continuing to be healthy, the F9 teams, Falcon 9 teams are tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is still looking good, and the range is green for launch. So we are at T-1.5 minutes from liftoff. And again, in about 30 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup. What this means is that the vehicle will basically be autonomously making its decision if it will continue with liftoff at T0.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And there's that call out that Falcon 9 is in startup.
Go for launch.
And at T-45 seconds, there was that call out for go for launch. Again, that was the Falcon 9 rocket making that decision autonomously. Now we are T-30 seconds from liftoff of our Starlink payload tonight. So let's listen in and watch liftoff.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff!
Falcon 9 pushing down range.
We are T plus 40 seconds into flight, and Falcon 9 has successfully lifted
Power
off
telemetry
from
nominal.
Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, carrying our Starlink payload to its targeted drop-off orbit. Moments ago, we did throttle down our engines in preparation for max Q, and that is the maximum aerodynamic pressure, which is the largest
Vehicle
structural
supersonic.
load that the vehicle will see. That's coming up here in a few seconds.
Max Q.
And there's that call out that we have just passed through max Q. In about a minute, we will have 3 events happening back to back. The first of which will be main engine cutoff, or MECO. This is where all 9 M1D engines shut off to slow the vehicle down in preparation for the second event, which is stage separation. Stage separation is where the first stage separates from the second stage, with the first stage starting to make its way back to Earth for landing, and stage 2 continuing on its journey, with the third event called SES-1, or second engine start 1. And that's where the MVAC engine lights up on the second stage and propels the second stage along with the Starlink satellites to its drop-off orbit. We are at T plus 2 minutes and 5 seconds, so we're just about 25 seconds away from those 3 events. Again, that is MECO, stage separation, and SES-1, or second engine start 1.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
And there you can see on your screen, on the left screen, we had main engine cutoff and stage separation. On your right screen is the second stage MVAC engine lighting up, glowing bright red there. And it is a bit dark on the East Coast, but you can see on your left screen that first stage, those grid fins are deploying. And on your right screen, we have fairing deploy coming up here.
Separation confirmed.
And there is that confirmation of fairing deploy. Now let's see if those fairing halves can be recovered by our recovery ships, Mystery and Mischief today. Again, we won't have that live. That will happen around T plus 40 minutes, so check in with our social media accounts for updates on those fairing halves. And stage 2 still looking nominal. Again, that is what you see on your right screen. Stage 1 is making its way back.
Acquisition of signal Bermuda.
And as the first stage makes its way back to Earth, it will perform 2 burns, the first of which will be the entry burn, and that is where 3 of the 9 M1D engines reignite, and this helps slow the vehicle down as it re-enters back into the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. And finally will be the second and final burn is the landing burn. And this is a single engine burn. That's the Center E9 engine that reignites and brings the vehicle all the way down, very, very rapidly slows the vehicle down so that it can touch down and land on the drone ship. Again, we are attempting to land the first stage today on Just Read the Instructions, as our Of Course I Still Love You drone ship was occupied with our Demo 2 vehicle from over the weekend
Vehicles
up until
on
last
trajectory.
night. We are at T plus 5.5 minutes. Stage 2 still looking nominal. And first stage making its way back That first burn, that entry burn, will be coming up in about a minute from now, around T plus 6 minutes and 45 seconds. And that entry burn will last about 20 seconds long. Again, that is to slow the vehicle down as it re-enters back into the Earth's atmosphere. Stage 2 on your right screen, still on a nominal trajectory. And on your left screen, it is a little bit dark. It is nighttime on the East Coast, but we should see that screen light up with that entry burn, those 3 engines reigniting.
Stage 1 FTS has saved.
Stage 1 entry burn is started.
And there you hear that call out, as well as a visual confirmation that those engines have reignited.
The vehicle continues to follow a nominal trajectory.
And stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And confirmation that the stage 1 entry burn is complete, as well as stage 2 still looking nominal, if you heard that call out. Coming up next is the landing burn around T plus 8.5 minutes, around 8 minutes and 24 seconds. Looks like we lost that live view of the first stage coming down, but that is expected. So hopefully we can get that live view back. Right now,
Stage 1 is transonic.
Right now, what you're seeing on your left screen is the drone ship just read the instructions. Followed very closely after the landing burn and landing of the first stage will be SECO 1, that is second engine cutoff, around T plus 8 minutes and 58 seconds.
Stage 1 landing burn is started.
Terminal guidance.
Landing legs have deployed.
Stage 2 FTS has saved.
And wow, as you saw coming
And
down,
JRTI,
that
we have
first
a stage 1
stage
landed.
Falcon 9.
Landing operators moving to procedure 11.100 on recovery 1 and DCF 9.
Amazing, that first stage booster has landed for the first time, for the 5th time for a Falcon 9 booster. That is amazing. We're waiting for second stage engine cutoff. What an amazing view of that first stage coming down, even though it was dark and night. But those engines lighting up the screen, watching first stage come down, was an amazing view. And we heard a call out of good orbit for second stage.
Acquisition of signal, Newfoundland.
And now that second stage is going to, now that second stage is in a good orbit, it's going to coast for a few minutes. And during this time, it will start to spin along its central axis, giving these Starlink satellites the momentum that they need to space themselves out over time after they deploy. So we will take a quick break and return back here at T plus 14 minutes. Welcome back to the webcast for Starlink. So far, we had an on-time liftoff tonight. Stage 1 successfully separated from Stage 2 and made its way back to land on our drone ship. Just read the instructions, which was the first time a booster has landed for a 5th time in SpaceX history. So very exciting. Stage 2 is still nominal. And now we are coming up on deployment of the Starlink satellites shortly here in about 40 seconds or so. And we firmly believe in the importance of a natural night sky for all of us to enjoy, which is why we have been working with leading astronomers around the world to better understand the specifics of their observations and engineering changes we can make to reduce satellite brightness. One measure we're taking to accomplish this is by adding a deployable visor to the satellite to block sunlight from hitting the brightest parts of the spacecraft. Now let's listen into that call out for payload deploy. And again, the first unit with the sun visor is actually on this payload right here that you see in front of you.
Payload deploy confirmed.
And there is that confirmation. We got a live view as it was deploying from the vehicle. Those Starlink satellites are making their way, separating from second stage right in front of you right now. Shortly, they will deploy their solar array, and over the next few days and weeks, they will distance themselves from each other and use their onboard ion thrusters to make their way to their operational orbit. And also, just to note, tomorrow is June 4th. That was actually the anniversary of our first Falcon flight. 10-year anniversary of our first flight. So very exciting time. First Falcon 9 flight. So very, very exciting times. And that brings our webcast to a close. Follow our website and social media platforms for updates on our next missions and milestones. And as the work goes on to build a better, more exciting future, please stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you at the next launch.